Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the 25th of May and the 21st week of 2012. For more than 20 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media. First on a so-called community radio station, and when locked out of there, welcomed, I'm happy to say, by the good people at Urbana Public Television. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight are Ron Szoke and Ed Mandel, late Republican committeemen in Champaign. We'll take turns suggesting overlooked or misreported items from the week's news, and then answering questions or comments from the other two. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who's been talking sense about American politics for more than twice the 20 years we've been on the air. Chomsky has said that in the American media, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true and it will sound like it's from Neptune. Today is Friday, May 25th. On this day in 1981, in Riyadh, the Gulf Cooperation, that's in Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Cooperation Council was created between Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. The excellent reporter Pepe Escobar has referred to the Gulf Cooperation Council as the Gulf Counter-Revolutionary Council for its recent activities in putting down the Arab Spring. In fact, of course, it began as a cooperative of the Arab states around the Persian Gulf, the oil-producing states around the Persian Gulf, under the patronage of the United States, for whom Saudi Arabia is, of course, a leading client. We might say one of two leading clients in the Middle East, the other, of course, being Israel. But the attempt to bring the Gulf states into an association with America's client, Saudi Arabia, resulted in the formation 31 years ago of the Gulf Cooperation Council on this day. It's been much in the news recently because it's been suggested by Escobar and others that essentially what the U.S. is doing vis-a-vis Syria is allowing the Gulf Cooperation Council to savage Syria, to remove a rival, in a sense, as a sort of a sop for not going after Iran. The U.S. prefers saber-rattling and constant threats to an actual descent upon Iran, in part because of the difficulties that that would produce. Iran is a serious state, and the U.S. would not be able to knock it over quite so easily as it's been able to knock over other states in the region. And, of course, it's had certain difficulties in knocking over those other states as well. So the idea that its client or clientage in the Gulf, in the GCC, in the Gulf Cooperation Council, should be allowed to chew up on Syria as a sort of a consolation prize for not being able to chew up on Iran, which of course is a real competitor for the GCC in the Gulf, makes a good deal of sense to me, and it seems to me that Escobar probably has that right. Today is also the anniversary in the year 2000 of the liberation of Lebanon. Liberation Day in Lebanon is celebrated, in fact, as a holiday in Lebanon, as Israel was driven out of the Lebanese territory that it had occupied for 22 years after its first invasion of the region of Lebanon in 1978. In the years in which the other major client of the U.S. in the region, after Saudi Arabia, has been Israel, in other words, roughly the year since 1967, Israel has attacked its neighbors on a schedule of usually every third year. The attack on Lebanon was one of 5 separate attacks on Lebanon in that period, and the one in 1978 lasted until the Israeli army was finally driven out, largely by the Arab party Hezbollah on this day, or celebrated on this day, in the year 2000. So the GCC in 1981, Liberation Day of Lebanon in 2000, anniversaries that remind us of the U.S. constant policy of clientage in the region. Our attempt to control the energy resources of the Middle East has employed these two major clients and continues to do so. The effective alliance between Israel and Saudi Arabia is part of the structure that the U.S. uses to enforce its will on the Middle East. The phrase cat's paw occurred to me while I was reading about these things and thinking about this and wondering whether that was useful. And I wondered where the phrase came from. I really didn't know. Went and looked it up. It comes from a fable, perhaps an Aesop fable, I'm not sure about that, in which a crafty monkey uses flattery to convince a cat to pull hot chestnuts out of a fire. The cat singes his paw, and the monkey gobbles up the chestnuts, leaving none for the cat. So a cat's paw is someone, essentially, who does a job for somebody else, but in the sense of as a pawn or a dupe, somebody who's been unwittingly tricked into acting in another's interests. Now, the phrase applies to the Middle East because of suggestions going back good ways now that the U.S. is acting as a cat's paw for Israel in the Middle East. It's the U.S. that is invading Iraq for Israel's purposes, and that Israel has cozened the U.S. into doing things which are not in the American national interest. The clearest statement of this view comes from Mearsheimer and Walt's book on the Israel lobby from about 4 or 5 years ago. An interesting argument, and not a stupid argument, but I think finally a profoundly wrong argument. On the other hand, those who say that Israel is America's cat's paw in the region, and Saudi Arabia is too, the cat has two paws, may be closer to the truth, that they're the ones who are doing the business, and that's not entirely a metaphor, of the United States, and the United States shares the increase, takes the increase of the activities of its cat's paws, Israel and Saudi Arabia. So, you're listening to News from Neptune, the Cat's Paw edition, and we'll begin with Ron Szoke.
Okay, Carl, what is the difference between a cat's paw and a dog's body?
That's a very good question, and that's one we should keep in mind. We'll call this the cat's paw, dog's body. The dog's body would be, the difference would be the cat's paw is effective. It gets the job done.
I see.
Whereas a dog's body simply lies there, right?
Yeah. Okay, I want to make another of my little ineffectual forays into what I call cognitive hygiene, trying to get our ideas straight.
Get clean for the
things.
Weekend.
Yeah, right.
There you go.
About things. And it's a continuing problem of many years standing for me, is about how the human mind ever makes contact with the external world or the reality beyond itself, if there is one. A big disputed question for centuries in philosophy, of course, is there a real world which is what it is, regardless of what I think about it or you think about it or anyone else thinks about it? And it turns out to be a major and perennial problem. So how do we know that we're ever getting anything right? Do we need divine a guarantee of that? Or is it enough for to observe that our science and technology experts have been rearranging the world very successfully? And is there some kind of pragmatic criterion here that we have to be getting it right? Or at least some people do in some respects. And it can't all be completely wrong. To claim that would be just too paradoxical. But I wanted to comment then on another paradox. These things always interest me. The argument against the Equal Rights Amendment, for example, that was being pushed by the feminists some 15 or 20 years ago. The two main arguments were that it wasn't needed because it wouldn't really change anything. And the other argument was it would change everything. It would totally upset things, turn the world upside down. And so you had your choice of which of those lines you wanted to argue. The paradox I want to call attention to is the stuff we're being inundated with now and will go on for the next 5 months. Unfortunately, I'd like to tune it out, but that's not possible, I guess. I'll call it the Romney paradox. The relevance of his business experience at Bain Capital, which is his prime qualification, apparently, for successfully running the country, according to some, and providing jobs and so on. And yet, those who are pointing out what he actually did there, what Bain Capital actually accomplished, was closing down most of those firms, firing the workers, and looting the retirement funds. And so they're saying that other people are saying what Romney did at Bain Capital is irrelevant. We can't go back to that. So you shouldn't criticize him on the basis of what he did at Bain Capital, that it's completely irrelevant. So which way do you want it? Is it his prime qualification or his prime disqualification, which should be ignored? And I think some people have a problem there. Well, this then takes me back again to a perennial problem I have about superstition and magical thinking on the part of many of our policymakers and public officials and so on. A devout and simple belief in some cases that there is an invisible hand that will reconcile the interests of everyone eventually. And there's no need to have any policy or planning to bring about lesser inequality that will be generated by the operations of unrestrained capitalism. In that vein, then, call attention to today's column by Paul Krugman about our business leaders, the masters of the universe on Wall Street, he says, are predictably, I suppose, whining and throwing temper tantrums because Barack Obama has been saying some things that they don't like, and so they're going to put all their money on Romney this time, apparently. Remember when Stephen Schwarzman of the Blackstone Group compared a proposal to limit his tax breaks to Hitler's invasion of Poland? They'll start screaming, Holocaust. Remember when Jamie Dimon of JPM Morgan Chase characterized any discussion of income inequality as an attack on the very notion of success, and so on. So this is kind of funny in a gruesome way. He talks about the myth that has been created by those people as if they're the saviors of America and the American economy, and yet he points out that this fable is not based in reality, but what he's calling attention to here mainly is the ego thing. Vast wealth isn't enough for them, he says. They want deference too, and they're doing their best to buy it. It's been amazing to read about erstwhile Democrats on Wall Street going all in for Mitt Romney, and because they believe that he has a good policy, not because they believe he has good policy ideas, but because they're taking President Obama's very mild criticism of financial excesses as a personal insult. So apparently their feelings are being hurt, and they're going to punish someone for that. So with that provocative opening, I will stop.
Provocative indeed. Thank you. It's up to you, Ed. You get to comment.
Huh? I think that one of the things you mentioned about Mitt Romney at Bain Capital was shutting down firms, I guess you said something to that effect?
Yep.
That was one of his experience. I actually think that would be a valuable thing, because I think that some people actually want him to shut down. You guys may not like this, but I think there are a lot of conservatives that want him to shut down the different operations of government. So, for instance, that we have too many, the government's too large. They want to have smaller government, and maybe some of the cabinet positions are not necessary, that shouldn't exist. And I won't pull a Rick Perry and say that there are three. I'll say at least
you can't remember them either, right?
I'll say at least the energy department should be shut down as being useless. And I'm sure you'd probably come up with other.
That, of course, wasn't what Romney was shutting down.
But I'm saying I would say that he would actually be perfect. He has experience.
Oh, I see. If you're shutting down things,
shutting things down, at least he has that experience. Whereas Obama seems to want to create things.
Not in Afghanistan. He wants to blow them up.
Oh my God, is that? Well,
yeah.
But anyway, that's just my thing now. I mean, when you say, I won't speak to how he made his money, but that's another.
Yeah, okay.
He probably doesn't want to either. Other comments on things Ron brought up are certainly in order, Ed, if you'd like to.
Oh, no, I didn't want to interrupt your flow of thought there.
Ron's worries about the external world end up being worries about David Brooks, and it was the first time he's convinced me that is indeed worries about the external world, if David Brooks is our example of it. But I did remember the Woody Allen's remark when Ron brought up the question of the existence of the external world. Woody Allen observed that it's not a question of whether there's an unseen world. The question is, how far is it from Midtown, and is it open after midnight?
Right.
That seems to me, yeah.
Yeah. Not only does God not exist, but try getting a plumber on weekends.
That seems to be a line of thought that Ron leaves off, particularly for a holiday weekend, maybe.
Yeah.
I do think, though, Ed, Ron, with your debts about the external world, hey, get out more often. Look around. I gather you are. Hey.
I didn't say I had those doubts.
I see.
Many
Just that
people
others
have.
did.
Yeah. How does our thought and language make contact with reality, or is it entirely self-contained? And is our language doing our thinking for us? And
I would say one of the problems with our society is technology. I think we're becoming too dependent upon technology, or we're using technology too much rather than direct communication, which we're supposedly doing right now. It's disturbing.
The question about language has surfaced again, of course, in connection with the presiding genius of our program here, Noam Chomsky. Been some arguments about Chomsky's notion about language again coming up in various ways, and it is, I suppose, worthwhile to remember that for Chomsky, language is not first of all about communication. He argues that human language is not just a method of communication like that used by ants, bees, and other species, just of a particularly sophisticated nature. No, he says it's quite a different thing, that our language is first of all for thought, for our own reflection, our own ratiocination, and only secondarily, as it were, is it a matter of communication, which raises some of your questions about how we, as it were, access the world or get into the world or what have you. So,
I think some cultural anthropologists would challenge that. I have a somewhat puritanical view of language myself. I think the primary use of it should be to state the truth, at least as you see it, but the cultural anthropologist will say, no, its primary use, why it arose was to promote social solidarity. And that's why it was preceded by grunts and groans and songs and so on, to get everyone thinking in the same way and doing the same kind of job. Like the Volga boatman. Yo-ho-ho-ho.
There you go. We have a little bit of singing in the show, apparently.
It's a holiday weekend. We all have got a little turn here to each of us before the hour's out.
They can't see my clown shoes today.
That's right.
Well, yeah, we're just not dancing. Yeah.
Oh, yes, which reminds me of the other thing that I wanted to mention from your comments on the Equal Rights Amendment. I want to argue a little later something about the nature of the arc, as they say in television, of the economy over the last 40 years that we are in some sense drawing the conclusions of today and in this administration. If the presidential election is about anything, and I don't really think it is, if it's about anything, it's about who will exercise influence from Wall Street. Your remark, Ron, that Wall Street seemed to be putting its money on Romney, I think is technically not the case, that Wall Street, which contributed much more to Obama than it did to McCain in the 2008 election, is also, again, contributing much more to the Democrats than it is to the Republicans in the run-up to the next election. So, I mean, they know which side the bread is buttered on, both as do the candidates. And it's clear that we have our choice between two minions of Wall Street for president, whose policies, as the Australo-British commentator John Pilger put it this week, differ by no more than a cigarette's paper. Well, okay. It seems to me to be about right, and Wall Street comes out if not looking good, at least in charge, whoever is elected.
I don't know if I entirely agree with you, Carl. I think Romney is a bit different than, well, a bit different economically. I could use in economics a little bit different than Obama. Because I don't think that. I was going to mention this Scott Walker in a few minutes, but I think Obama pretty much doesn't care for Governor Scott Walker's plan.
Well, you see, in 2008, a lot of people thought Obama was different from George Bush too, and they elected Obama, and they turned out they got George Bush's policies.
I'll say that as far as the foreign policy is concerned, I would agree their policies are.
I would say their foreign policies were at least as close as
yes.
as their domestic policies.
Well, anyway. We'll go for that.
I did want to comment on the Equal Rights Amendment, though, because I want to talk a little about unions and the economy in a few minutes. But it occurs to me that the Equal Rights Amendment, which is now a historical artifact, as you pointed out, Ron, actually says some aspect of what we called in illo tempore the women's movement that we don't talk about very much. It was part of the system that produced essentially stagnant wages in American society for 40 years, from the early 70s on, and produced the structure of politics that we have in this country that includes the diminution of unions for all various people, including the much mentioned Scott Walker and the Mr. Romney himself, want to try to attack the unions. Of course, what they're talking about is organizations that are a shadow of their former selves. And one of the things that killed unions in the 70s in America was the women's movement. I mean, looking at it from the point of view of the owners of business in this country, suddenly to have a doubling in your potential workforce, and a doubling of those who would in fact work for less than those who were working at the current time, completely subverted many existing union movements. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that women don't have a right to work. Of course they do, but a real right to work, not what we call right to work, in the Midwestern states for the most part. But it's certainly true that one of the effects of the attacks on diversity from the 1970s on was to dish unions. And we can't get around any sense of economic justice if we don't recognize what actually happened. And that is what happened, eh? So a lot of the arguments about the Equal Rights Amendment and related issues turned out to be important in another way. So they probably remain to be done yet. You are watching News from Neptune, a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media. And we'll go now to our special guest this week, Ed Mandel, for whatever's top of his list.
Well, I was going to start off with the local stuff about the with
yes.
Tim Johnson. Obviously, Tim Johnson resigned after the primary, which I thought was wrong.
Maybe we should point out that Tim Johnson was the congressman from this region.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, most people, and had been Republican congressman here for 10 years.
He'd been voted in about the primary here locally as the candidate, and then right after he promptly resigned afterwards. Yep. And I thought that was rather wrong of him, actually. I even mentioned to him personally, but I think he just dismissed it. I guess maybe he wants to think that his decision was made after the primary. Although apparently Jerry Clark, one of the candidates who was going to replace him, knew about it 3 months ahead of time. So how did he know before? How did he know enough to create his own website a few months before the resignation to realize that Johnson.
Clark is such a dunce that I think he may have just been guessing. I mean, people who said, yes, it was a setup that Johnson wanted to be succeeded by Clark, they turned out to be quite wrong.
Well, I don't know, because it was a rather clever guess, because he actually, again, like you said, he set up a website and he created
he did this, but the notion that he did this with Johnson's connivance or even support seems to me to be hard to sustain right now, don't you think?
Well, yeah. But anyway, it didn't work.
I think he's just a dumb guy.
It didn't work anyway, so it wasn't. Right,
it didn't work.
This plan didn't work because obviously Rodney Davis was the one who was picked by the 14 Republican chairman, or chair people, I should say.
And he's a piece of work, isn't he?
Oh well, yeah, that's another story. But yeah, I thought he wasn't the best candidate of the four. I guess you were at the forum and you saw that the two women got the best reaction from the audience. I guess Kathy Wessick and Erica Harold.
Well, they were so much smarter than the two men. That's
they were
the
better
reason.
prepared, I guess. But as it turns out, Habib, the local the Champaign County, he did support Erica Harold on all three votes that apparently took place. And
Ed wasn't stuttering there. The man's name really is Habib. Habib.
Yes, that is the fellow's name. Yeah. But he did support Erica Harold, the local Miss America from a number of years ago, and what she was, apparently she was very well prepared for her thing. And
was indeed
the forum, and she was. From what I understand, she was better. But apparently, Ronnie.
I was there. I heard her, and she's a corporate lawyer in Chicago, and a good example of the breed.
It's kind of sad. The fact that it worked out that way, because she would have really put David Gill's candidacy in his entire. How do I say this? His constituency into a dilemma, because she's the idea she's a young African American woman. Those are three constituencies that the Democrats can constantly they look for votes. And,
you're talking about landslide David Gill, the putative candidate of the Democrats for the 13th Congressional District,
yes.
won by a fraction of a percent.
Anyway, I'll just say that I think Ron Davis will probably win anyway, but it would probably be much closer. And I think David Gill is probably a very weak candidate. That's not a story. I know that unfortunately your major issue obviously is the foreign policy issue, which Tim Johnson upheld, which apparently none of the four candidates and none of the four Republicans or even David Gill support. So I guess they don't. As far as they're concerned, the foreign policy is a resolved issue. The war is over. The troops have come back. I'm being sarcastic.
Oh, you go ahead.
I'm being sarcastic, so I understand the fact that the war is still going.
Yes, indeed.
But as far as the media is concerned, the more media has betrayed, the troops have been brought home, the war is over, and that's it. So what's the problem? It's not an issue anymore, and we shouldn't even address it. And take it seriously.
Of course, the troops haven't been brought home.
Yeah. I guess we have mercenaries over there right now.
No, on the contrary, we've got a great deal of American forces throughout the Middle East, and more American drones killing people and throughout the region, including half a dozen countries that we're not at war with. The notion that the U.S. is withdrawn seems to me. Yeah, you're not seriously contending the U.S. is withdrawn, is it?
Yeah, right. No.
Good.
But I understood. We also have a lot of mercenaries. We have a lot of paid mercenaries.
That's certainly true.
Certainly in the thousands, and so literally we still have a presence over there militarily, but it's not official. It's not considered official. Just like, I guess now it's graded to a police action or so.
Official enough that your tax money is paying for them.
Yes,
so
yes. Anyway, I wanted to mention that, and I thought also Erica Howe would have been perfect because she would have fit into the context of upsets. We've had some upsets here locally. In Nebraska, Deb Fisher won, and she wasn't the favorite candidate, and she came out of nowhere to win her position in Nebraska. And also, Richard Murdoch beat Richard Lugar a few weeks ago, and that's considered an upset, although is more of a less Dick Lugar was really he never had residency for like 40 years or 30 years or so, and at his time in office, and so he probably deserved to lose there. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So I guess you would just
comment on that, Ron? Do you want to say something about local congressional?
No, I have very little to say about.
I guess
local politics at this point.
I think Ed's point, though, that the local politics here and national or indeed international politics intersect in the 13th Congressional District here in Illinois in an unusual way. The retiring Congressman, Tim Johnson, and in the interest of full disclosure, I should say that I ran as a Green against Tim Johnson 10 years ago and had as many nasty things to say about him as I could think of at the time for obvious reasons. And I don't see any reason to change any of those things I said. It's Tim who's changed, not some of the rest of us. Tim, after being reelected, decided that although he had voted for the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan and for the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which I told him not to do during that election, by the way, even though he'd done that he had been wrong to do so, that he had made a mistake to vote in that way. Many people, including I think Ed, question his motives about saying he'd made a mistake. But the fact of the matter was that Tim Johnson of Illinois became one of the few certain Republican votes against any more money for war in the Middle East. And he voted consistently that way for a good time. Our friend Robert Naiman from Just Foreign Policy tracked that and made a point of noting that Tim Johnson belonged to that small fraternity that included Walter Jones of North Carolina, Ron Paul of Texas, and other Republicans who voted consistently and constantly against American war in the Middle East. Now, his retirement, Tim Johnson's retirement that Ed just referred to, knocked this arrangement into a cocked hat, and we were left now, when this minor puff of smoke from the middle of Illinois recedes, with two candidates, Republican and Democrat candidate, running for this seat of the most conventional sort. David Gill, who has run several times for this seat, is now contesting it as the Democratic candidate after a very near-run Democratic primary. And the only thing that bothers me particularly about David Gill's candidacy is that he seems not to be cast in the same mold of an anti-war voter that Tim Johnson was. And as Ed just pointed out, the Republican candidate certainly is not that way. The Ron Paul wing of the Republican Party has been excluded entirely, even though Tim Johnson was the introducer of Ron Paul to a large and enthusiastic rally on campus.
Yeah, unfortunately, in the next few months, the entire wing is actually going to be gone. I mean, I think Ron Paul is resigning also.
Well, you say that, Ed, but I have my doubts. I mean, every generation and a half we have what the political scientists call a realigning election in this country, where what happens is the American ruling class has to rearrange its class allies in order to be, I mean, look, the American 1% is not numerous enough to rule on its own. It needs help.
I would say in the House, right now, the federal and the House it is going to be vanishing, but there is a sun in the Senate.
Yeah, but my point is that if there is indeed a real collapse of the Republicans because people start laughing too hard at Romney, and that's easy to do, it's not out of the question, it seems to me, and the wish is father of the thought here, I'm sure, for the Ron Paul wing to end up as the residuary legatee of the Republican Party. I'm not betting my ranch on it, believe me. But on the other hand,
Ron Paul did plant a lot of seeds of thought. And,
beg pardon?
Ron Paul did plant a lot of seeds, and he created a lot of. He created a new generation of people.
And it's not over. The thought that there might be a floor fight in the Republican convention over the war, fills my heart with glee. So we'll see if something comes of that.
You think there's a chance of Ron Paul running as a libertarian, independently of the Republicans?
Yes.
Okay, I would say no. I don't think it's going to happen because I mean, even I think he said something to the effect that he's not going to do it. I mean, he ran a number of years ago in 1988, and I don't think he's going to do it again. I think he pretty much gave his shot, and I think he's pretty much that's it.
I will have to say that if I were putting money on it, if it really was a matter of bet, I would bet it. I would bet it Ed's way. I would bet that he wouldn't.
It's actually said, by the way.
But I was, if give me good enough odds, and I might think about betting the other way. I think that after the Republican convention, it's not out of the question for there to be an independent move by the Paul people in the Republican Party, in part because they're so numerous. In the midst of primary season, we were hearing all the horse race talk on the news. What was actually happening in a lot of state convention was that Ron Paul enthusiasts were ending up in good positions in the Republican Party, and there are going to be more of these people at the Republican convention than the Republican leadership would like.
Yes.
And the chance that something may come of that, as I say, I wouldn't bet it that way, but give me good odds, and I would.
Yeah, I've been hearing that under the radar, as the cliche goes, Ron Paul's been acquiring a lot of delegates.
I will say that there was an upset, I think in Massachusetts of all states, where some of Ron Paul's delegates upset the major candidates. I forgot their names, but they were I think the lieutenant governor, the former lieutenant governor, to Romney, I think she lost, and another prominent fellow who also lost. So yeah, no, I mean Ron Paul obviously had an influence, and also he was obviously my first choice actually. I don't want you to think I'm a Romney guy, so because I probably said something positive about Romney, but yeah, it's kind of well, I'm just trying to be realistic. This is what we were dealing with here tonight.
Last Saturday morning, as I was leaving the farmers market in downtown Urbana, I was asked to sign a petition to get libertarian candidates on the ballot locally, apparently.
Yep.
And I signed because I think that would be a good and healthy thing from the Democratic point of view, small d, of course. And is there a problem with that? I mean, I'm sure I've
not at all.
Yes,
also signed for other candidates.
Oh no, not at all. No.
Yeah, a great deal of problem. The problem is that the Illinois is one of the most difficult states in the union. All of the states are difficult for the non-business parties, that is, not the Republicans, not the Democrats, to get on the ballot. The person who was in charge of that enterprise for Ralph Nader has written a book about it, quite an interesting book. She's a lawyer in Washington. I met a little while ago, and the remarkable crazy quilt of election laws across this country are designed basically to keep non-players out. I mean, the players being the Republicans and Democrats. I mean, we see a local example of that. The main reason we have this peculiar 13th congressional district in the middle of Illinois is what's been called sweetheart gerrymandering, whereby the Republicans and Democrats sit down together and say, okay, let's divide it up so you get some and we get some and nobody else can play. And we discovered that with the Green Party a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And the thing is, in Illinois, as I say, it's particularly difficult to get on a ballot for national office. And even the Green Party, which has been at it for a while, is not yet certified for the Illinois ballot, although they have a very attractive candidate, a woman called Jill Stein, and I'm hoping that they will indeed be on the ballot too. The Libertarians whom you signed for, Ron, have been trying to, and they've been around for years trying to do this. Yeah. These Libertarians are not Ron Paul people. This is the Libertarian Party that's existed in this form for years. Yeah. So, but it's hard to do in this state, and it's not clear now what names will be on the ballot when the presidential election comes around in November. In Illinois, I mean, well, or in any other state for that matter. Yeah. But it is a problem. You're watching news from Neptune. Where are we? Whose deal is it? I think it's mine.
Well, it's yours. I'll bring up another issue after you're finished.
All right. Well, let's go around. Well, I have one that I think will be close enough to your heart in any case, Ed. So this is a paragraph from one of the most interesting economists writing about American society right now, Richard Wolff, and he says, and I quote, "Since the 1970s, most U.S. workers postpone facing up to what capitalism had come to mean for them." The notion that it was a real change, a sea change in American capitalism in the 1970s, I think is right. And it parallels my own working life. You know, I saw it happen, but only slowly did it become clear what was happening, and it took clever people to describe what was happening because the people who were making it happen didn't want it to be known. What I'm talking about here is the rise of neoliberalism as an economic and political strategy in the United States, to put it crudely, in reaction to the 60s. That's basically what happened. Okay, the changes were recognized by people much more in their personal circumstances than they were in the political discourse at large, because the political discourse at large was designed to mask what was happening. So Richard Wolff writes, "Since the 1970s, most U.S. workers postpone facing up to what capitalism had come to mean for them." You know, the changes were there, it's happening, but, you know, you got to try to believe it wasn't happening. They sent more family members to do more hours of paid labor. What I was referring to a moment ago as one of the effects of the women's movement was to make more laborers available, but it was also, I mean, you know, in those years, I was pointing out to my university students that when I graduated from college, someone with a BA, a bachelor's degree in this country, could get out of college, get a job without much trouble, get married. We're assuming naturally he's male. Hey, it's the 60s. Get married, buy a car, buy a house, all on that one salary. Yeah. Now that disappeared in the 70s, and it disappeared like the, you know, the cool temperatures for the frog in the hot water. Huh? It disappeared without people quite noticing what was happening. And by the time I was telling my students that you could have done such a thing when I graduated from college, they didn't believe me, because they knew perfectly well it wasn't possible for them. Yeah. That was the change. That's what happened. So Wolf goes on, they sent more family members to do more hours of paid labor. They borrowed huge amounts. That was part of the source of the great housing bubble that produced the crash. By exhausting themselves, stressing family life to the breaking point in many households, and by taking on unsustainable levels of debt, the U.S. working class delayed the end of American exceptionalism. What he means by there was the exceptional place of American workers in what's been called the golden age of capitalism, the generation after 1945, after the end of World War II. Until, says Robert Wolf, the global crisis hit in 2007. By then, their buying power could no longer grow, rising unemployment kept wages flat, no more hours of work nor more borrowing were possible. Reckoning time had arrived. A U.S. capitalism built on expanding mass consumption lost its foundation. And what that meant is that for Americans, the vast majority of Americans, the situation approached, even before the crisis of 2007, Depression standards. Wages have been flat in this country since essentially 1973. And the other side of this, of course, was that there was a vast and an acceleratingly great gap between the very rich and the very poor. What we speak of today is the 1% and the 99%. The 1% were doing very, very well indeed. We had about 20% of the populace, roughly college graduates, thinking, you know, gee, if they could just get into the 1%, everything would be ducky, and so they'll do anything to do it, so forth. And for the 80%, there was perhaps a better realization that their conditions of life were being confiscated. And that is the background of our contemporary politics and some of its craziness, I think. It seems to me unless we recognize what has happened over a generation and more in American politics, we're not going to be able to understand our present situation in which we have an election that is no election because there are no differences between the parties on the policies that we followed. It doesn't matter which party you get for, you get the same policies anyhow. Policy is insulated from politics, and we have the increasing realization that if we're going to change any of this, it's going to have to be done by essentially extra parliamentary methods. That's what Occupy is about. That's what the other arrangements that are growing in this country. We have not noticed, I think, that there is a social revolution going on in Quebec right now. It started out as a student strike, and as now people are understanding that it's a strike against austerity, it's a strike against the economic reorganization of that province, and it's not just a student riot. Something interesting and important is happening there, and it may not be an accident that's in this province that somehow connects American and European concerns that makes this possible. I'm not sure.
I seem to recall that there was a Quebec independence movement going back quite a bit of time. I seem to recall that it goes back at least over a decade. I mean, I don't know.
That's certainly true.
That's something else.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the American Revolution before. Well, yeah. I mean, you know, it's when England took Quebec away from France in the first place.
I just remember something much more recent than that. I think it had to do with the language or something.
There's an interesting parallel here, though, because Prime Minister Trudeau in the 70s essentially put a fascist regime in place in Quebec to put down that Quebec separatist movement. Yeah. Now, people are comparing that to what's happened in these last 2 weeks in Montreal, where the provincial government has passed what they call Law 78, state, which is an attempt to, by essentially police state methods, stop the expanding student strike. Well, so far it hasn't worked. They had literally hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Montreal this week, and there's no suggestion that it's coming to an end. It's rather a suggestion that it's expanding into the general anti-austerity project that we see in one form of in Europe, and I think in a different form in this country.
In harmony with that, let me bring a couple of things forward here from Joseph Stiglitz, the economist at Columbia and Nobel Prize winner and all that. In a interview, he said, when you look at America, you have to concede that we have failed. Most Americans today are worse off than they were 15 years ago. A full-time worker in the U.S. is worse off today than he or she was 44 years ago.
Forgive me.
That is outstanding. That is astounding. Half a century of stagnation. The economic system is not delivering. It does not matter whether a few people at the top benefited tremendously. When the majority of citizens are not better off, the economic system is not working. Strong words from Stiglitz, who's saying that this austerity drive is suicidal. It's just utterly backwards, the reverse of what we should be doing.
And the interesting thing is here, Ron, is I think we're hearing this same theme in different ways from economists, serious economists who hold different sorts of political views. You mentioned Paul Krugman a moment ago, Stiglitz, Paul Wolf. They're all saying exactly that, but they're saying it from what we might call different ideological positions or even different political positions.
Richard Wolff or Paul Wolf?
Sorry, Richard. Yes, Paul Wolf. Right.
Not Paul Wolf. Richard Wolff.
Richard.
Oh man, with the technical wolves.
No, I'll tell you later why I'm confusing that. But
Okay.
it's boring to say so. Why now? Say why now? Yes, the economist Professor Wolf points out that the situation that Professor Stiglitz refers to is correct. Even Professor Krugman agrees. You're watching news from Neptune. We will press around. Let's see. I think we may have time for a second round here. Ron, you want to go?
Well, I have a number of things here.
We'll get to you.
A curious piece in the Wall Street Journal saying that the accusation that Obama went on a spending binge and is bankrupting the country is another of these baseless myths. The article by Rex Nutting in the Wall Street Journal says that the government outlays are rising at the slowest pace since the 1950s. Of all the falsehoods told about President Barack Obama, the biggest whopper is the one about his reckless spending spree. As would-be President Mitt Romney tells it, quote, "I will lead us out of this debt and spending inferno." Almost everyone believes that
Stay
Obama
with me, Shadrach.
has presided over a massive increase in federal spending and an inferno of spending that threatens our jobs, our businesses, and our children's future. Even Democrats seem to think that it's true, but it didn't happen. And he goes on to spell out why this is another fairy story. It's just not true at all.
Then why has our rating been downgraded?
Well, that involves many other factors. It's not spending alone. I wanted to ask you, Ed, you talk about the government being too big. What is the metric by which we judge whether a government is larger or smaller?
Well, when it creates regulations that prevent business from operating.
No.
I think there's been a lot of regulation. I don't have examples.
That's an absurd misconception, it seems to me. Well, the most plausible metrics would be number of federal employees, or size of the budget, or there would be. But which one is right? I mean, how do we tell whether the government is larger or smaller?
The regulation talk, I think, has some problems too when we realize that we mentioned a moment ago the golden era of American capitalism from 1945 to the early 70s. That, of course, was also the time of the greatest regulation of American industry, of American business. Regulation coming out of the Second World War, where we essentially nationalized the economy in order to fight the war, right? I mean, the New Deal, which was often blamed for nationalizing the economy in order to save it, in fact didn't. What nationalized the economy was the war effort, and that's that's where the the control, the government control of the economy came from. War is the health of the state, as was pointed out in the First World War, and the state did very nicely, thank you, in that sense, out of both wars. So the period from 1945 to 1970 was the most regulated. The deregulations began with the coming of neoliberalism. That was this sort of thing that they started, roughly with the Carter administration and the Reagan administration, when the major deregulations of industries and so forth occurred. Yeah. Banks, notably, but also airlines, interstate commerce in all of its forms. There was the deregulation, and the period, the last generation, the period since the 70s, is the period of the loosest regulation of American financial and industrial interests.
I believe it's broadly true also that the most heavily regulated economies in the Scandinavian countries and some other places, such as Canada, came through with the recent economic recession in the best shape. It was a fairly strong correlation. More regulation, more health in getting through the thing.
Well, we've heard that again in connection with the Glass-Steagall business and the banks. J.P. Morgan Chase dropped a couple of $1 billion on the ground somewhere the other day, and they're looking around for the change, checking down in the grates and so forth.
Right.
And people have suggested that they would not, their pockets would not have been so porous had Glass-Steagall still been in place. There are technical problems here, but it's certainly the case that the activities of these guys is far less regulated now than it was a generation ago, once again.
I don't know if I agree with you, but I'll just say I also disagree with the idea that our debt has not increased. It has increased. I mean, a great deal because of the stimulus spending has increased our debt quite a bit. I mean, I don't know, and the creation of all these czars and basically all the czars are each a cabinet position in each of themselves and.
I would be happy to do away with some of the czars, particularly the assassination czar. We heard about this last week. John Brennan, this old spook who's around there making up lists of people to kill around the world.
I would go way beyond that. And fire
I would go way beyond that, too.
Fire all the czars, just get them in a circle there. And tell you to go
and give each a drone and let them pick a partner.
If you want to. But I believe there's a lot of there are a few cabinet positions there I think are worthless and they create all sorts of ridiculous rules and regulations that people that would generally disagree with, but that's just me, I guess.
That's got to be nonsense. I mean, we know. Look. If for a recession means lack of business activity. Nobody's buying, selling, therefore nobody's hiring. There are no jobs, so forth and so on. How do you get out of that? The answer's been clear since the early 20th century when people began thinking about how these business cycles work. Probably clearer before that, but it was explicit in the discussion. You need more people buying stuff. No company is going to start hiring more people and producing more stuff unless there are customers out there wanting to buy what they have and customers with money wanting to buy what they have. So the way you end a recession is to produce customers with money.
Right.
I mean, there's not even any. That can't be hard to understand, can it?
Well, I did disagree with where those customers are coming from, and not the government, and they would come from a private industry.
Well, I don't care where they come from, but the point is that you need people with money. Where does your money come from? Private industry or the government? I don't know. I mean, the point is that if we... The notion that the reason that American business is not expanding, the reason that a growth of American industry is as low as it is, and I use industry in the broad sense, is too much regulation, seems hard to credit. We know that what happens is that this company is not producing more things because there aren't more customers out there to buy what they're producing. It's not that Chevrolet, I've taken a poor example, haven't I? It's not that Ford isn't producing more Fords because it's got too many regulations. Ford's not producing more Fords because you and I aren't buying more Fords. Well, surely that's the reason. You'd agree, right?
Well, I just disagree with how it's being done. I think reducing the size of the government is good. Well, I don't know.
Well, look, I'm completely with you on reducing the size of the government. I would take half of what the government spends and stop doing it. Of course, that half would be the half they spend on the military.
Yes.
Well,
let's stop doing that. There's the reduce. There's the size of the government. The world's largest employer, the world's single largest employer, is the Pentagon. Stop them from doing it. Find other ways for those people to have money to buy stuff.
Largest user of hydrocarbon fuels, and on and on and on. Many people just don't seem to remember that the military is a government bureaucracy.
And that one, its regulations, we'd be happy to stop dealing
Yeah,
with,
yeah.
particularly Mr. Brennan's.
Yeah, it has one of the largest systems of completely socialized medicine in the world.
Well, I won't disagree with you guys that our foreign policy needs to be reformulated. I mean, there's a lot of things about that's rather strange, but that is a major conversation. I only last like 4 or 5 hours.
Well, Ed, since we've jumped on you here, we'll give you the last word.
Well, yeah, I was going to mention about pensions of all things.
Okay.
And then,
Tell us about.
I mentioned about Scott Walker previously. I wish I didn't have to discuss this because I was kind of hoping that decades ago there had been some sort of a financing engine for all the pensions, and that we wouldn't need to do things now like what Scott Walker did, stripping collective bargaining rights from federal state workers up. And I wish he didn't have to do that. But I believe what he did was it had to be done. What he did required a certain amount of courage, if you will. By the way, I was going to bring up some quotes from other people here. A quote: "It is impossible to bargain collectively with the government." And I have a quote by another person, and it was George.
You're talking about elections now?
No, this was a person from many years ago, George Meany, who was a former president of the AFL-CIO. He said that
I remember him well.
And I've been just reporting out that there were people that actually would have agreed with what Scott Walker did. Also, apparently, from years ago, in terms of accepting collective bargaining procedures, government workers have no right beyond the authority to petition Congress, a right available to every citizen. And this was by the AFL-CIO Executive Council.
Oh, unless the New York or Chicago Cops.
This was back in 1959.
Ah.
So I'm saying there were things that were said many years ago that would have agreed with what Scott Walker did, and the difficult decision to try to make sure that Wisconsin budget survives. I mean, obviously, what's happening in California, they're at $500 billion in debt right now. Well, not $500 billion in debt. They have a major problem there because of the pension system out there, and there are different cities that are threatening to go on, that are threatening to declare bankruptcy. And how do we deal with that? And I suppose both of you would agree with the idea of increasing taxes. I think that's a bad idea because that's just creating a death spiral that is driving businesses out of the state and driving literally the tax core is leaving.
We're clearly taxing the wrong people, as we've argued here.
Well, anyway, I would just that's another story.
So they're stashing their money in Swiss bank accounts and in the Cayman Islands, perhaps.
That's where Zuckerman has his, right?
Well, that's where Romney has his. Yeah.
Romney has his. That's right.
Hey, well, I'll just say that I think there are other ways of dealing with it, and apparently Scott Walker is successful because I don't think he's going to be reelected. He's going to survive the recall.
I think you're probably right about that.
Weeks. What?
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
He will.
This has been News from Neptune for May 25th in the 21st week of 2012. Our program is named in honor of Noam Chomsky. This has been the Cat's Paw Dog's Body edition. Your choice. If our program has interested you, you may want to look at these programs heard regularly and repeated throughout each week on Urbana Public Television. Tomorrow at 7 a.m., the David Pakman Show. At 2 p.m., a repeat of this program. On Sunday at 3:30 p.m., the Populist Dialogues, Coal Trains. That's not a jazz program. At 4 p.m., Labor's Worldview. Weekdays next week, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Democracy Now!, 8 a.m. The Big Picture, noon The David Pakman Show. Monday the 28th at 8 a.m. a Memorial Day special, American Veterans, Discarded and Forgotten, Hour 1 of 3, that's their title. The American Government's Legacy of Abuse and Neglect of its Soldiers and Veterans, a series of films by Dr. Gary Null. That's at 8 a.m. on Monday. At 10:30 a.m., American Veterans, Discarded and Forgotten, Hour 2, and then the third hour of that program will come on at 1 p.m. At 2 p.m., the Tom Hartman program, a 3-hour live nationwide call-in show. On Tuesday the 29th at 7 p.m., the European Journal from Deutsche Welle, a particularly good program. At 7:30 p.m., In Focus, Bin Laden's Bodyguard. This is a peculiar thing. Okay, take a look at that. At 8 p.m., town hall meeting on protecting the Muhammad Aquifer. That's a repeat from the 17th of May. And at 9 p.m., The Dark Side of Chocolate, Child Slavery in the Ivory Coast. At 10 p.m. on Tuesday, May 29th, Aware on the Air, starring Ron Szoke. You have been listening to, we're on the air, I started to say. You have been listening to News from Neptune. My discussants tonight have been Ed Crazy Hawk Mandel and Ron Szoke.
Oh, wow.
I'm Carl Estabrook. Inshallah, we will be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, that what's past is prologue, what to come and yours and mine is charge. And in the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.